Welcome back to Chapter 3. Today we are working with Lesson 3.3, Compare and Order Decimals, and this can be found on page 163 in our textbooks. So the standard we are working with today is in Number and Operations in Base 10, 5.3, and it's the second part of the standard. So it does say I can compare decimals using greater than, equal to, and less than symbols. So our essential question, how can you use place value to compare and order decimals? So the unlock the problem question says the table lists some of the mountains in the United States that are over 2 miles high. How does the height of Cloud Peak in Wyoming compared to the height of Boundary Peak in Nevada? So if you look at the mountain heights, we do see that we are looking at the Boundary Peak from Nevada at the top of the table, and then Cloud Peak in Wyoming, which is right below it. So one way to compare decimals is to make sure we have our decimal points lined up. So notice in this step one, they do have the two decimals stacked on top of each other. Looking up at the table, we do see that they do have the Cloud Peak listed first on top of the Boundary Peak from Wyoming. So we always start at the very left of the number, the largest place value that is given, and then you can compare the digits in each place value position, and you keep looking until you have where the digits are different. So for step one, our largest place value is the ones place, and you do notice that both mountains have a 2 in the ones position. Because they are both the same number, you then move on to the next place value. So for step two, we are comparing the tenths, and our tenths both have 4s in them. So again, we do have where they are equal to each other. So then moving to the next place value, on step 3, we are now comparing the hundredths. So as you can see, it's the hundredths where they are first different. You can circle that to show that that's where they are first different. And I do see that the 9 is greater than 8. So therefore, I know that the top number, the 2 and 495 thousandths, which would be the Cloud Peak in Wyoming, would be the greater number. So since 9 is greater than 8, then 2 and 495 thousandths would be greater than 2 and 488 thousandths. Or if you wanted to write that in reverse, the 2 and 488 thousandths would be less than the 2 and 495 thousandths. So that means the height of Cloud Peak is greater than the height of Boundary Peak. Now another way to solve this using the different mountains this time is to actually place your decimals in a place value chart. So this time we are going to compare the height of Cloud Peak to the height of Wheeler Peak. So if you recall from the table, Cloud Peak was the 2 and 495 thousandths. And then if you look at the place value chart, the Wheeler Peak is 2 and 493 thousandths. So just like before, we are going to compare starting at the largest place value that is listed, and then work our way to the smaller place values until we find where they are first different. So looking at the ones place, we do see that they both have a 2, so those are equal to each other, so that means we need to go to the next smallest place. Looking at my tenths, both of them again have a 4, so that means I need to move on to the hundredths. Both of them have a 9 in the hundredths position. So moving to the smallest position listed, which is the thousandths. This is where they are first different, so this is how I will compare them. I do know that 5 is greater than 3. And since 5 is greater than 3, then 2 and 495 thousandths would be greater than the 2 and 493 thousandths. Or if you reverse those two numbers, you would say the 2 and 493 thousandths would be less than the 2 and 495 thousandths. So the final statement, the height of Cloud Peak is greater than the height of Wheeler Peak. Moving on to the next page, we can also order our decimals by either going from greatest to least or least to greatest. So make sure you read the questions carefully to figure out the order that they are asking for. So my example says Mount Whitney in California is 2 and 745 thousandths miles high. Mount Rainier in Washington is 2 and 729 thousandths miles high. And Mount Harvard in Colorado is 2 and 731 thousandths miles high. Order the heights of these mountains from least to greatest. Which mountain has the least height and which mountain has the greatest height? So there's three things that they are asking us to do for this question. So my first step is, so that way I can compare from least to greatest, is to make sure that I have my decimal points lined up. Again, making sure that the place values are all in line, so that way I can compare these numbers very easily. Next, I want to make sure I then look to see where they are first different. So I noticed that in step 1, looking at all their ones place, they all have a 2. And then also looking at the tenths place, they all have a 7. So now I want to look at the hundredths place. So on step 2, I see that the hundredths digits are all different. So I need to order my hundredths digits from least to greatest, because they are asking us to have our final answer going from least to greatest. So looking at my hundredths digits, I know that 2 is the smallest number, and then the next smallest would be 3, and then the next would be 4. So now I'm able to put these heights in order from least to greatest. So the mountain that had the number 2 in the hundredths place would be Mount Rainier, which was 2 and 729 thousandths. Next was Mount Harvard, which was our 2 and 731 thousandths. And finally, we had our Mount Whitney, which was 2 and 745 thousandths. And again, we were able to do this because of the hundredths digit. So there were 2 additional questions that they were asking. And the first one was, which mountain had the least height, which we know the smallest number from our least to greatest was our 2 and 729 thousandths, which was Mount Rainier. And then the mountain that had the greatest height, which was our 2 and 745 thousandths, was Mount Whitney. Moving on to the try this. They did give us a place value chart that they started writing in the numbers for us for finding the order of 1 and 383 thousandths, which they wrote that number in for us. Then the 1 and 321 thousandths. Then 1 and 456 thousandths. And finally 1 and 32 hundredths. And they do want us to place this from greatest to least. So I want to make sure when I order or compare any decimal, I need to have them all go out to the exact same place value. Notice that the top 3 numbers all go out to the thousandths place, and then the 4th number only goes out to the hundredths place. So to have a place value holder for my thousandths, I would place a 0 after that 2, because now all of my numbers go out to the thousandths place. We always place a 0 to have the numbers all go out to the same exact place value, and that 0 is our place value holder. So now we can start comparing, and I noticed that all of them have a 1 in the ones column. So I now have to look at the tenths place. 3 of the 4 have a 3 as their tenths digit, but one of them, right here, the third one down, has a 4. Obviously, my 4 is greater than my 3, so I already know that that is the greatest number. So the greatest number is the 1 and 456 thousandths. So I am going to circle this so that way I know that I am done looking at this number. I no longer can use any of the other digits because I've already listed it as my largest number. So moving on to compare the next 3, because all 3 of those have a 3 in the tenths place, I now have to look at the hundredths place. So I see that the top number has an 8, and then the second one and the bottom one have a 2 in the hundredths place. Well, obviously 8 is greater than 2, so I know that that is my next largest number, my 1 and 383 thousandths. I'm going to draw a rectangle around this to show that I am done with this number now, that I've already included it in my list. And finally, because the last 2 numbers that we have not used yet are 2's in the hundredths place, I need to look at their thousandths digits. Well, the second number down has a 1 in the thousandths place, and the fourth number down has a 0. This is why we needed to place that 0 in the thousandths position, so that way we could compare their digits. So obviously 1 is greater than 0. So that means the 1 and 321 thousandths would be next, and then finally we would have our 1 and 32 hundredths. So to place all of those numbers in the actual order in which they go, I again started with our 1 and 456 thousandths. I am going to place a semicolon, which is just a comma with a dot above it, because I do not want to just place a comma just so that way I don't think I have any numbers in the thousands. My next number we said was the 1 and 383 thousandths. Again, I'm just putting a semicolon in place of my comma. Then we know that the 1 was larger than the 0, so I next have 1 and 321 thousandths. And finally, the smallest number was the 1 and 32 hundredths. If you ever have to add a 0 as a place value holder and then you reorder those numbers, please do not keep that 0 in. It wouldn't count it as wrong. However, it is best practice to always write the original number down that has been given. Moving on to the next page, under the share and show. So again, number 1, they gave us a place value chart for us to easily be able to compare. And we need to figure out what is the greatest place value position where the digits differ. So if I look at my 2 numbers, I see that the ones place is both the same, the tenths place is both the same, but now the hundredths place is where they are first different. So that is what they want us to show for question number 1. They want us to show that it is the hundredths place. And then if I was actually comparing, I would say that 3 and 472 thousandths would be greater than the 3 and 445 thousandths, obviously, because 7 is greater than 4 in the hundredths place. The next 3 questions, we have to compare and then write the symbol of how we would compare them. Remember, it is best practice to stack your numbers so that way you can easily compare their place values. So I am going to rewrite both numbers so that way one is stacked on top of the other. And then after doing that, I can compare by place value. So the ones digit are both the same, the tenths digit are both fives, the hundredths digit is where they are first different. We do know that 6 is greater than 3, so that means I need to use my greater than symbol. So that would be read as 4 and 563 thousandths is greater than 4 and 536 thousandths. Moving on to number 3, stacking both decimals. I see that the second decimal only goes out to the hundredths, where the first one goes out to the thousandths. If you recall, we do add a 0 to the thousandths position, so that way we have them both going out to the same place. And after doing that, we can then compare and see that all digits are the same, so those two numbers would be equal to each other. And finally, for number 4, again, stack both decimals, so that way we can compare by place value. And when we do this, we see where they are first different is the hundredths position. And we do know that 7 is greater than 3, so I would have the greater than symbol. Next, for 5, 6, and 7, we need to name the greatest place value position where the digits differ, and then we also have to name the greater number. So I am going to stack my decimals. This will allow me to compare very easily. Noticing where they are first different is the hundredths position. The top number has a 7, the bottom number has a 6. So I would on the line write hundredths. Make sure you have your THS to indicate that this is a decimal position. And then to compare and naming the greater number, 7 is greater than 6. So the 3 and 579 thousandths would be the larger decimal. Moving on to question number 6. Stack the decimals so that way we can compare. And to now check to see where they are first different. Obviously the ones digits are the same, but the tenths digits this time are different. So the greatest place position where they are different is the tenths place. And to name the larger number, it would be the second number that I wrote, so my 9 and 637 thousandths. Moving on to question number 7, I'm going to stack my decimals again. So I see that the ones position is the same, the tenths is the same, the hundredths is the same, but the thousandths place is where they are different. So thousandths and we do know that the 9 is greater than the 2, so my 4 and 159 thousandths would be the larger number. The next section is ordering from least to greatest. The easiest way to do this to make sure you do have it ordered correctly is to stack your decimals. And then I do notice that I have some that do not go out as many decimal place values as others. And I need to make sure that they all go out to the same decimal place value. So when I stack these, I am going to add my zeros as my place values holders. So for the first number, I have 4 and 80 thousandths, then 4 and 300 thousandths, then 4 and 803 thousandths, and finally 4 and 38 thousandths. So now as I work, because I want my numbers in order from least to greatest, I'm going to cross off as I find my smallest numbers. So all 4 of my numbers do have a 4 in the ones place. So now I'm going to look at the tenths. I see that I have 2 that have zeros, and we all know that 0 is the smallest value. So I am going to look at the top number and the bottom number to find my smallest number that is listed. So looking at both the top and the bottom, I'm now only looking at their hundredths digits. So I see that there is an 8 on the top one and a 3 on the bottom one. Obviously 3 is larger, or I'm sorry, 3 is smaller than 8. So my smallest number that was listed was 4 and 38 thousandths. So that is what I will write on the line first. Oops, as I forget my 0. Sorry about that. And I'm going to make sure I cross that out of my list, so that way I'm not looking at that one anymore. And then the next smallest would be my 4 and 8 hundredths. Remember, we did add a 0 to that number, and I always write the original number back down. So that original number was 4 and 8 hundredths. So now I can cross that number out too. Going back to the tenths digits, because the two remaining numbers have different digits in the tenths place, I now have to find the smallest digit in the tenths place, and we know that that would be the 3. And looking back at the original number, it was 4 and 3/10. So that's all I'm going to write. I'm not going to write that 4 and 300 thousandths. And crossing that one out, I do see that there is only one left, which would be my 4 and 803 thousandths. So now doing the exact same thing for number 9. Again, I do want this from least to greatest, so I am going to stack my decimals. So starting with the first number that was given, and then moving down. I do see that the third number does not go out as many decimal place values, so I'm adding a 0 for my place value holder. And now I have all 4 of my numbers listed. So the ones positioned, they all have the same number. So now I'm looking at the tenths. And again, they are different on the tenths. And with the smallest, the least to greatest, what I need, that means I need to look at the zeros. 0 is the smallest number. So I'm looking at the 1 and 37 thousandths and the 1 and 73 thousandths. Well, looking at the hundredths digits now, because they both have a 0 in the tenths, the 3 is smaller than the 7. So my very first number that I have to list to go from least to greatest is my 1 and 37 thousandths. I'm going to cross that one out. And then my next would be my 1 and 73 thousandths. So now I can cross that number out. Looking at my last 2 numbers that are remaining, they both have a different digit in the tenths place. So to find the smallest one, I'm comparing the 3 and the 7. 3 is obviously smaller than 7. And if you recall from the original number, it was just 1 and 37 hundredths. I'm not putting that 0 at the end because I added that only to do my comparison. So finally, the largest number that was listed was 1 and 703 thousandths. So at this point, you can pause it, and then when you do 10 through 19 on your own, you can then turn it back on to check, compare your answers with mine. So for number 10, after lining up both decimals, I do notice that they are equal to each other. If I add a 0 to the 8 and 72 hundredths, it would be the exact same thing as 8 and 720 thousandths. Number 11, after lining up the decimals and finding that the tenths digit is where they are first different, we would see 4 is greater than 2. Number 12, if I lined up my decimals, I would see that the tenths digit is where they're first different, and the 0 is less than 3. For question number 13, I also noticed that the tenths digit is where they are first different. 5 is less than 7. For number 14, to make them both go out to the exact same place value, they would both have zeros in the hundredths and the thousandths, so they are equal to each other. Number 15, if I line up my decimals and look at their place values, I noticed that the hundredths digit is where they are first different, and 6 is greater than 5. For question number 16 through 19, you had to order from greatest to least. So my greatest number after lining up my decimals would be 2 and 97 hundredths. Next, I would have my 2 and 714 thousandths. Next would be my 2 and 9 hundredths. And finally, I would have my 2 and 7 thousandths. Moving on to question number 17. After lining up my decimals, I do notice that my largest decimal is my 725 thousandths. Next, I would have 572 thousandths. Third, I would have my 275 thousandths. And finally, 2/10 is my smallest decimal. Number 18, my largest decimal after lining them up is my 5 and 43 hundredths. Next, I would have my 5 and 340 thousandths. Thirdly, I would have my 5 and 249 thousandths. And last, I would have my 5 and 209 thousandths. And finally, for question number 19, to order from greatest to least, I do have a ones digit that is different, and obviously 1 is greater than 0, so I automatically know that that is my largest decimal that is listed. Next, looking at the 3 that have zeros in the ones place, looking at their tenths, you would notice that the 6 is what is the greater number, so you would have to go to the hundredths, and that would then say that the 687 thousandths would come second. Then your 678 thousandths would be third, and lastly your 587 thousandths would be the smallest. If you ever had to find unknown digits from numbers that are being compared, this is actually not very difficult. It might be best if you do line your decimals up. So if you notice that our first number for number 20 is 3 and 59 hundredths, then we would have 3 and 5, and then notice there is a missing blank, and then a 1 in the thousandths place. So that means I want to put a 0 in the thousandths place on my top number. And then finally, I would have my 3 and 572 thousandths. Notice they are using greater than symbols. So because I have my numbers stacked up, I can then say 9 is greater than our missing number, which our missing number would be greater than 7. Obviously, the only number that would come in between 9 and 7 is 8. So I now know that my missing digit is an 8. On the next one, if I line up my decimals, again, we have greater than symbols, so I know that the top number that I just listed is the biggest number. This time I don't know the thousandths digit. And we can see that they're all the same, and the ones, the tenths, and the hundredths, and then it's the thousandths where we are different. So because I have 7 is greater than our missing number, and our missing number is greater than 5, I know that my missing unknown number would be a 6. And finally, number 22, lining these decimals up. The tenths digit is what's different and the second number. And the first two numbers only go out to the hundredths, but the last number goes out to the thousands, so I am going to add zeros. And this time we have less than. So because I have less than, I need to figure out what my missing number would be and still keep it less than. So I know that the 2 and 45 hundredths is supposed to be the smallest number. So if I have 2 and 450 thousandths, and then 2 and something 160 thousandths, and then 2 and 461 thousandths, I know that I need to keep the tenths digit all fours, so that way then I am comparing the hundredths digit. So my missing number is a 4. Moving on to the homework. On your homework for ThinkCentral, or I'm sorry, on Schoology, you are going to be doing questions 2 through 8. So that means you are going to circle 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Now for 2 through 6, where you are writing your comparison symbols, it's less than, greater than, or equal to, and it'll be a drop-down box on Schoology, so you don't have to worry about typing it in. You just have to select the correct symbol. Then for numbers 7 and 8, make sure that you are ordering them from greatest to least, and you will be able to manipulate the numbers. You'll be dragging them to the correct location to have them from greatest to least. Then moving down to the bottom, you are going to be circling number 12, and I want to know which is the least time. I need to know the least time, so the smallest number. And again, make sure you line your decimals up to figure out the smallest number, the least. Moving on to the back, you are going to be completing all questions on the back. Notice for questions number 1 and 2, you are going to be using the table that's off to the right with Jay, Elena, Evan, and Stacy. For number 1, I want the person who has the greatest amount of liquid left. And for number 2, I want the person with the least amount of liquid left. So you are going to be choosing their name. For the spiral review, for question number 3, it says Janet walked 3 7/75 miles yesterday. What is the word form of 3 7/75 miles? Remember, you just write it how you say it. That's from lesson 3.2. Number 4, a dance school allows a maximum of 15 students per class. If 112 students sign up for the dance class, how many classes does the school need to offer to accommodate all students? So I do need to figure out how many classes that they would need by dividing 112, the total number of students, by 15 students per class. So this will give you a remainder. We need to interpret the remainder. So remember, if you do not have enough classes, you will have some kids that are left over, and so therefore you will need to make sure you have one extra class from your what you get for your quotient. So don't forget to add 1 to my quotient. For question number 5, what is the value of the expression? You are using your order of operations. Remember PEMDAS. Parentheses, exponents, multiplying and dividing, whichever one comes first from left to right, and then adding and subtracting, whichever one comes first from left to right. And finally, number 6, Kathy cut 2 apples into 6 slices each. So figure out the total number of slices. Then she ate 9 slices. What expression matches the words? This will be a multiple choice question on your homework on Schoology, so make sure you try to figure out which operation goes with those 2 key words. Let us know if you have any questions. Thanks.